Hey y'all, it is I, Anthony the Canadian Guy, and welcome to Wrestlesode, the solution to your wrestling information problems. Wrestlesode is a member of the Win Column Sports Network, so remember to check us out at wincolumnsports.ca to be kept up to date on everything happening here in Alberta in the world of wrestling. So I got a whole bunch of cool stuff to chat about, but today we are going to be having our interview with PPW Heavyweight Champion, PPW Promoter, Sydney Steele. It was an awesome chat to talk about his career in wrestling, how he transitioned into a promoter, how he came over from, the Maritimes here to Alberta and settled in Lethbridge, and how that whole transition went. And it was a really great story. Not only that, we also got to answer a bunch of fan questions that you all asked. So you're going to want to listen in for those. Like I said, really fun chat. You're not going to want to miss this one. On top of that, a couple of cool little announcements here. The Wrestlesode website is getting a gigantic facelift, as you all know. And today I have released a brand new feature over at wrestlesode.com/spotlight. You will see it in the link to in the link below. I don't have it officially set up on like a navigation part on the website yet. I will eventually add it, but today you will see a new weekly feature, which is the Wrestler Spotlight, where once a week I will go ahead and take another wrestler outside of the Western Canadian scene and spotlight them, give them, list off all their social medias, their achievements that they've done, podcasts that they've done, links to merchandise, cool pictures, stats, stories, anything that you want to see over there at wrestlesode.com/spotlight. So you're not going to want to miss that. Also, our good friends over at Backbreaker Media just uploaded a new match between Michael Richard Blaze and Jude Dawkins from 2017. As well, on Tuesday, they will be uploading the most recent Force Pro Wrestling show that happened. It's going to be going over to backbreakermedia.pivotshare.com, their online streaming service. It's $6.99 a month. But if you go sign up now, there's a 2-week free trial. Also, if you use the coupon code Wrestlesode, you can get 50% off of your first month. So think it's like 2 weeks free, then 50% off the next 4 weeks. So it's like 6 weeks for almost nothing. It's an amazing discount. So you're going to want to go over to backbreakermedia.pivotshare.com and check that out. All right, so let's go hear from our sponsors over at the AJHL and then get straight into our interview with Pure Power Wrestling champion, Sydney Steele.
From Lanny McDonald to Daryl Sutter, Mark Messier to Cale Makar. Before you're a star, you've got to make it in the AJHL. On Saturday mornings, TSN 1260 takes an in-depth look inside the Alberta Junior Hockey League. Join Tyler Yaremchuk from 9 to 10 a.m. for previews, reviews, and interviews from around the AJ. Inside the AJHL, Saturdays from 9 to 10 a.m. Only on Edmonton's sports leader, TSN 1260.
Hey everyone, Anthony here. I am joined with the PPW Heavyweight Champion, Sydney Steele. Sydney, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm not too bad. How about you?
I'm not doing too bad. I gotta ask, because I've asked every single person I've done this interview with recently, how's the whole COVID-19 situation affecting your life? Are you handling it okay?
Well, I mean, it's a little annoying that, suddenly going from booked solid for 2 months to nothing happening. But I think it's a good opportunity. I don't think that there's, as frustrating as it is, I don't think that there's anybody wrestling in Western Canada right now that probably couldn't benefit from a couple months of rest just to recharge the batteries and, recover from anything nagging and hopefully, come out of the gate really hard when all this is sorted out.
No, that's a very good way of putting it. I know a lot of people seem to be in planning phase, or as soon as things kind of go normalized, they have all these big plans to try to move out and be like, okay, now we're going to do some incredible stuff. I'm actually as weird as it is to say, it's I don't enjoy this little bit of a break, but I'm very excited to see what will happen as soon as it starts back up again, because everybody's going to be hungry at that point.
Well, that's just it. Everybody will have missed not being able to wrestle for, who knows, 1 month, 2 months, up into 3 months, and I think everybody will be really excited to get back and try some really cool stuff.
Oh yeah, I think it's going to be really awesome. So let's get talking about Sydney Steele. So you've obviously got a huge history when it comes to the world of wrestling. Not only are you a wrestler, but you're also a promoter. You've held a lot of different hats in the wrestling industry since you've kind of gotten into it. But let's go all the way to the beginning. Sure. Where did it all start? How did you fall in love with wrestling to begin with?
I've really been into wrestling as long as I can remember. I mean, I think I got really, really, really into it in probably 3rd grade, 97-ish, right? That's when all of my friends were super into it too, and it was kind of the cool thing we all liked, right?
Right.
But I mean, I more than any of them really took to it, right? It kind of became the number one thing.
It's funny, like I hear that story and it's like, that's kind of what it was like for me and all my friends. I think you and me are probably around the same age. So it's like at middle school, everybody was out there in the field, like crotch chopping.
Yeah.
And everybody was like in their backyard playing on trampolines, doing moves like that you would never be allowed to do these days because it's 2020 now. I'm 100% with you on that. So like, were there any specific wrestlers that you kind of gravitated towards when you started watching wrestling?
I was a huge fan of when I was starting. I mean, everybody likes Bret Hart. Every Canadian likes Bret Hart. Right. But I was hugely into guys like Triple H and the physically larger than life guys, right?
Mm-hmm. I always, like the Undertaker.
I always thought the big giant guys were the coolest, were the ones that I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Just anybody who was like 6'5" and full of muscles, essentially.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. When I used to play like the old video games and stuff, because like I'm like 5'8.5". I'm about as far from one of those giants as you get. But like that's always what I wanted to be as well. It's like I was like, I just wish I could grow up to be that guy.
Well, those were always the guys that even today I associate with what a wrestler looks like. Mm-hmm. Right? So you look back to the 80s and you had guys like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and these guys who were, big, muscled up dudes, and you don't see as much of that anymore, right?
Right.
So that's kind of what I associate with when I think of what does a pro wrestler look like, is those big, muscled up guys who are, bigger than the average person sitting in the crowd and, big, strong guys.
Yeah. So the way you said that makes me kind of put two and two together. So the whole Macho Man, is that where you get the whole robe situation, like your beautiful...
Yeah, it was really strange. I was actually working an RCW show in Calgary probably about 18 months ago. I just had the long hair and the trunks and the beard, and a guy came up to me after the show and said, you remind me so much, you look like Randy Savage. And that got me thinking that, not that I necessarily want to rip the guy off, but when I looked at kind of some of the capes and all that kind of stuff that Randy Savage used to wear, there's nobody doing that anymore, right? There's, a lot of guys are trying to do the Ric Flair robe and that sort of thing, right?
Right.
But there was nobody just doing that the Randy Savage cape and the just cool, different way of moving around and doing different things.
Right. So you're a kid. You really enjoy watching wrestling. You gravitate towards different wrestlers and everything like that. But how did that transition from watching it to actually going out and trying it for the first time?
So actually, when I was, how old was I? Probably 18. I was in my first year of university, and I was really hating it. I had done freestyle wrestling all through high school, so I had experience doing that type of wrestling, and I loved professional wrestling. And there was just kind of a point in my first year of university where I kind of said, I don't like school. I don't like much of anything but lifting weights and wrestling. And at that point, I was all of 150 pounds.
Okay.
And so I looked up both Devin Chittick and Gary Williams out in Halifax, where I was. Mm-hmm. And I actually got the opportunity to meet Gary, have a little bit of a tryout, and just kind of never looked back from there.
So I've got a couple questions with that. What did you go to study for in college or university?
I was taking a history degree. It was a terrible choice. I was, like I said, 18 years old. At that point, it was kind of, you've got to go to university, right? After high school. So went to university, and like I said, just was hating it. I took the degree that seemed to, be something that I could study.
Right.
And it just wasn't for me. The whole university thing wasn't for me. It's a little interesting. I've since gone back, and I've completed a marketing program. That was a number of years ago now, but just kind of funny how things come full circle, because at that point there was a marketing program at my university that I was like, well, I don't really want to take this. I'll take history. I'll try that. And just kind of interesting that, if 13, 14 years ago, I had taken that marketing program, we might not be sitting here talking about this, right?
It's funny you say that, because like with the marketing program, that must be coming in a lot more handy being a promoter for PPW than any history degree would.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
But then again, a history degree really did do pretty good for Luchasaurus, so I mean, I guess it really depends on how you look at it.
Exactly.
So you started wrestling down there in Nova Scotia. How did you eventually make the trek out here to Alberta?
Well, I moved out here in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been wrestling in Nova Scotia for probably 18 months or so, and made the move out here, made the move to Lethbridge, and at that point, Power Zone Wrestling was running here in Lethbridge,
right?
And I just kind of got in on the very tail end of PZW. It was I think I was here for maybe 3 or 4 of their events before they had shut down,
right?
And at the time, when I moved here from the Maritimes, there were a number of companies running, multi-day tours. Some companies would be running 10-day tours. One company would be running, 1 or 2 big tours a year sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't a ton of opportunity to wrestle on a really regular basis, right? It wasn't always necessarily like it is out here now, where you can work. Really, if you want to, you could work every single weekend wrestling. So I came out here expecting, that was going to be the situation, that there was wrestling as far as the eye could see. And then about 4 months later, PZW shut down, and I was kind of left a little bit to my own devices. Thankfully, Adrian Walls, for some reason, seemed to take a liking to me right away and helped me out with getting me booked in a couple other places up in Edmonton, a promotion that doesn't exist anymore. And so I was still able to do some wrestling, but it wasn't necessarily what I had anticipated when I moved out here.
That's very fair. And actually, it leads into a really good question that one of the listeners asked later on. I'll kind of just dive into it. We're not really doing the fan questions yet, but this comes from my friend Craig. He says, what were your first impressions of the Lethbridge scene when you debuted in then Power Zone Wrestling? And then what are your favorite matches that you've been in since with that?
My impressions were a little weird. This wrestling out here was very different than wrestling in the Maritimes. The Maritimes were very much into big, brawling type guys. Your smaller, more technical, more high-flying guys, really, they were your undercard guys, right? It was just basically as simple as that. And coming out here and, the first Power Zone show I see, there's guys flying all over the place, and there's, cool spots being done that at that time you just didn't see out in that Maritime scene. It was very different. Power Zone, to be honest, was a little blood and guts for my taste. Mm-hmm. Not my personal taste in wrestling, but the fans, to this day, the fans that were fans of Power Zone Wrestling still talk about the promotion. It's almost, a little bit of an ECW feel, right? The guys who were fans of ECW in the 90s still reminisce about their promotion, their cool company.
Right. That's it's funny because you said this next thing, which transitions into another question that I got from Paul from YYC Wrestling Hub. And it was very similar to the first question. Specifically, you said, what are the biggest differences that you noticed coming from Alberta from Nova Scotia? Obviously, like you said, the wrestling style in itself was dramatically different. He said Power Zone Wrestling closed in 2008. What was the fan reaction like when Pure Power Wrestling opened its doors in 2010? Were the fans difficult to get back, or did they come back instantly?
The fans, the hardcore fans, the ones that had been to every single PZW show, they were there instantly. But it's like I said, PZW was a little blood and guts for my taste. It was definitely, a product of the time it existed, mm-hmm. right? And so what we found, you were at the Power Rumble, just about
February 29th.
Yeah, so not quite a month ago. It feels like it was forever ago.
Yeah, it's about a month because that was a fake day. That was one of those leap days.
You were at the show. You see that, we do very much what you would call a a family-friendly product. Well, you're still hard-hitting. You're still getting pro wrestling, but it's a product that you can bring, your kids to. We've got, grandparents bringing their grandkids to our shows. We've got, 3 generations of family sitting in the front row, sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
And so to explain to potential fans here in Lethbridge that what we were doing was not going to be the blood and guts. It was not going to be what you'd gotten for the past 5 years. Some were receptive, some were not receptive, but it was also being able to explain that, this is a product that you can bring your entire family to. And actually, I've had conversations with the promoters from PZW in the last few years. I mean, I don't think it's any secret. Stormbringer was the promoter of Power Zone Wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had conversations with him where he's said to me that if Power Zone had continued, what we're doing with Pure Power Wrestling would be a lot closer to where they would have shifted. Because the taste for that style of wrestling, especially when you get into 2008, 2009, people were a lot more concerned. WWE had gone completely PG. People were a lot more concerned with blood and weapons and headshots and that sort of thing. It was just kind of the direction that the business as a whole was heading.
It always feels like approximately every 10 years or so, there's kind of like a new generation where the wrestling style kind of has to evolve with the times.
I would say that's true. Yeah. You've got, for quite a while, it was the Attitude Era style, right? It was cursing and swearing and get away with anything you want. And, the women were very highly sexualized. Every second match was a hardcore match. And then I would almost call it a pretty dramatic shift. It was pretty, it wasn't something that happened necessarily slowly to become more of, that U.S. indie style that you were seeing coming out of Ring of Honor and stuff in 2005, 2006.
Where like a lot of like the big names these days all kind of started out in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But now you've been wrestling in Lethbridge. You wrestled down there for Power Zone. 2 years later, obviously, you start Pure Power Wrestling. How did you get the idea to even start a promotion? Like, how did that kind of even pop into your head?
Well, one day out of the blue, I got a phone call from Ed Gatsky, the Gothic Knight.
Mm-hmm.
He, very similar to me, had come in at the tail end of PZW. He was a wrestler in the 90s and the early 2000s and had taken a few years off and from Southern Alberta and had been kind of resurrected by Power Zone. And a couple months after PZW closed his doors, I got a call from him out of the blue, kind of asking if I would be interested in working with him to start up something new. And I mean, at that point, I probably didn't have anywhere near the amount of experience I should have had to be starting a promotion, but didn't know any better, so jumped on it. And here we are, 9 years later?
Yeah, almost 10 years later at this point.
Yeah, we started the company. Ed was involved for the first 8 years. Actually, last year we had a change in ownership. Me and another group of guys bought him out of the company.
Mm-hmm.
But he really let me take the reins with PPW. I was, like I said, doing stuff that I had no business doing with the amount of experience I had. I was the booker of the company with maybe 3 years experience wrestling. Mm-hmm. I was promoting shows. I was, booking talent and putting cards together and doing all this stuff. It was really kind of a sink or swim, because it was either the company is going to be successful and start drawing fans fairly quickly, or we're not going to run this company, right?
Right.
We weren't going to be a company, drawing 50 fans for the first 2 years it existed, hoping that we were going to grow.
So what were some of the challenges that you faced then? So you started up, Pure Power Wrestling, and you, like you said, you got a whole bunch of the hardcore fans back right away. But how did you restart drawing in the casuals? And then how did you keep those people that were so into the blood and guts from the generation prior and convince them to stay with such a different type of product?
Well, the people who the people who had been around Power Zone, they love wrestling, right? So they don't necessarily care what style of wrestling they're getting. They want to see wrestling.
Right.
To bring them in and to keep them there, it really wasn't all that difficult because we were still putting on a strong product with really good professional wrestlers. It was, I've got to give a lot of credit to Ed, to the Gothic Knight, for helping to bring in crowds when we first started. He was very well known in the community and had the ability to talk to people who might not otherwise come to a wrestling show at all, get them to come just to try it out, and the product we would put on would keep them there. But, I owe a lot to guys like Massive Damage and Vance Nevada. Vance Nevada in the early days really taught me how to not be a shitty booker. Like, he helped me a lot with how to book the company and how to structure a card, because coming into booking PPW, I had no idea how to structure a card. I had no idea even how to get in contact with a lot of talents because I hadn't been out here for a very long time. So I owe a lot to guys like Massive Damage and Vance Nevada and Steve Rivers, because a lot of times I would put a card together and I would send it off to those guys to look over, to let me get their input and let me know what they thought was good, what they thought was bad, where things needed to be changed, what matches probably wouldn't go off very well. And they really taught me a lot about how to book a company, how to run a company, and with Massive Damage, even how to help train wrestlers to break them into the business.
Yeah, I guess when you kind of make that transition from wrestler to promoter, suddenly it's like not just like a new world. It's like millions of new worlds you got to get introduced to for the first time.
Well, exactly. It really is. It went from, I'm hopping in a car, I'm showing up to a show, setting up the ring, being told what my match is, and off we go, to suddenly I'm the guy running the entire thing from the minute you walk in the door.
Right. So it's no longer like that day. It's weeks ahead kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it was, snap of the finger overnight. It wasn't, this wasn't something that happened gradually. It was, one month I'm just talent working on a show, being told what to do, to the next month we're running a show here in Lethbridge and I'm doing it all.
Well, let's talk about your first show, because now I'm like super interested. Do you remember much about the first show that you put together?
I remember we didn't have a ring. We ran this show in a boxing ring because we had planned on renting a ring that fell through we ran on Saturday, and at about 7:30 on Friday night, I got a phone call saying that the ring we were renting wasn't coming. The weather was supposed to be bad, and they didn't want to risk the highways with the ring. So, of course, scrambling, we contacted actually the Lethbridge Boxing Club. So really, we owe the boxing club and Rick Duff a lot for us even existing today, not having to have canceled that first show. They let us use their boxing ring, and it was a terrible experience to bump in. but we were able to run that first show, and I believe we used their boxing ring for the first two shows that we ran, and then we're finally able to get our hands on a ring that we owned.
That you were like a lot more comfortable to take a couple of bumps then.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, credit to the guys. They could have gone out there and done absolutely nothing because they were in a boxing ring, but they put on a hell of a show for the fans. And that's kind of been the story of PPW from day one, is the guys that are coming in are busting their asses for the fans. I really can't say enough good about it. We're kind of in our own little interesting world down here, where we are really one of the only places that you can see guys from all of the different companies in Calgary and Edmonton that are putting on matches together, right?
Yeah.
Guys that you're not going to see wrestling in Calgary. You're not going to see wrestling in Edmonton. You might get the chance if you want to make a drive out to the middle of nowhere to see them on, one of those RCW shows. Mm-hmm. But really, we're one of the only places where you really get that opportunity to see some of these guys wrestling that you might not get to see wrestle each other otherwise.
I can completely agree with that because, like I said when I went down for the Power Rumble, I was like, it was kind of a unique experience for me because even though you guys are so close, it always kind of felt like Lethbridge was slightly separate, and I didn't like that. So I'm like, no, I got to get down to Lethbridge. I want to start covering the Lethbridge scene. And I remember the first match I got to see was Dante versus Bradley Graham. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm just like, I haven't seen these guys wrestle singles before ever, like just in person. And I was like, this already feels kind of like special and unique in that sense. And then like you said, you can bring in different stars from different promotions and kind of in Lethbridge, you're on your own little world where you can see stuff that you wouldn't be able to get to see in Calgary and Edmonton, unfortunately.
Well, and it's nice. It's been kind of the way we've operated from day one is, we don't deal with, I don't care about the politics of Calgary and Edmonton wrestling. It's not something I care about. To be honest, I don't consider myself to be, an RCW wrestler or an Alberta wrestler. I'm just an independent wrestler myself.
Right.
I wish more guys looked at it the same way. But from day one, it's been, if we think you're a good talent and we've got a way to use you, we're going to put you on the card regardless of who else you work for.
Right.
There was a little bit of a period there when we were working with Vance Nevada in the CNWA and had a very close working relationship with Monster Pro Wrestling where for a period of time it was by and large the MPW guys we were using. It was a pretty good, I guess you would call it a talent exchange opportunity because it gave a lot of our guys the opportunity to go up to Monster Pro and work. But really, we're booking the best talent that we can here in Western Canada, regardless of what other companies they work for.
I really like that because I also don't really like that mentality of like, it's like this company gets this star and they're not allowed to share them. I don't really feel like that's a great way, in my opinion, personally, just to handle business because I think it holds too many people down and keeps people at bay. So I really like that you say that because like when I was when I went down for the Power Rumble, like I saw stars from MPW, RCW, PWA, like everybody was inside of that ring and it felt really nice and refreshing to see.
Yeah, and it gives all these guys another place to work and experience working different people.
Right.
Because there's only so good you're ever going to get working with the same guys over and over and over and over in a company. Mm-hmm. So having the ability for an MPW guy and a PWA guy who might never cross paths otherwise to come down and do something completely different than they're ever going to do in, those companies that they're kind of calling their home base. It's great for the fans and it's great for the talent too.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that you've been promoter for almost 10 years for PPW, what would you say the biggest lesson you've learned from that transition has been?
Oh, man. I've said this before. There were promoters that I worked for when I started that I thought were just the greasiest fucking guys. Just the things that they would say or the things that they would do, you'd have to do a double take. And now that I've been a promoter for a while, I completely understand it.
The Sauls of the world, essentially.
Oh, my God. I try to take a different approach than some of what I experienced breaking in. But when I was breaking in and I had promoters that were saying, oh, we had a bad night, we can't pay anybody. And, at the time I was like, oh, that's, that sucks. I'm sure that's not true. And then I run a show that is, is not making the most money. And I'm looking at it saying, how in the hell am I going to pay these guys? I completely understand it now.
You're like, suddenly there's like, I get that kind of fear, that back end. You're just like, oh, there's a lot more to worry about than just
exactly. Yeah, there's so much more on that end to worry about than like you said, where's the ring and what's my match gonna look like?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't really get the idea of what that looks like because people, even just wrestlers and stuff, like they come in day of or they'll get a call a couple of weeks ahead. But like you're talking with the venue weeks ahead of time. You got to make sure people have insurance. You got to make sure people are booked off time. There's so many things that kind of go into being a promoter.
And I'm really grateful now over the last year that we've had this new management group, and it's gone from really me shouldering the entire load to being able to spread it around. And so, I'm not the guy who has to do, all of the graphic design, and as well as, getting there and making sure our music playlist works, and doing this and doing that and doing this and doing that, and drawing up the pay envelopes at the end of the night and all that kind of stuff. Having the ability now that I've got 3 really, really awesome partners that are really going above and beyond to help make sure this succeeds it's unreal.
And it's working out for you because, like I said, that Power Rumble show just made me want to go back again and again. So, like, once this whole world kind of settles down and we start seeing shows again, like, I'm just like, I can't wait to make it down for another PPW show. And I've been convincing people up here, they're like, okay, I'm going down for that show. Because it was awesome. Like, I had a really great time. And I'm like, I got to go back. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the questions that we got off of Twitter, just because I don't want to run out of time here. So we'll talk a little bit about these. I got a question here from Paul over at the YYC Wrestling Hub once again. As someone who literally wrestled across the country from BC to Nova Scotia last year, who are some of the shining talents that aren't well known in Alberta that you'd like to bring to wrestle here?
Oh, there are a ton. There's guys out in the Maritimes that, and props to them, because if you follow what some of those guys are doing, they're going all over the place. These guys are really, really doing well, breaking into Quebec and Ontario, and, props to those guys, because 10 years ago, when I was out there, I guess more than 10 years ago now when I was out there, that wasn't happening. You had the odd guy that would get a shot in, across the border in Maine or in Quebec. But now, because of the hard work those guys are putting in, they're regularly getting shots, like I said, across the border into Quebec, into Ontario. It's really awesome to see. And I mean, there's guys out there like Lil Blade, Cody Blade, who worked out here for quite a while. He was actually in PPW for a long time. He was just one of the hardest working kids I've ever seen in pro wrestling. But his close friend Dylan Davis, just every time I see him doing stuff, it's really cool stuff that I'd love to have the opportunity to bring out here. And then you look on the other side, you look into BC, and the number one guy that jumps out to me would be Jace Darcy. He's a kind of a man after my own heart. He very much, you can tell, takes wrestling seriously, takes his body and his physique seriously. And, he's one of those guys, like I mentioned before, that when you picture what's a pro wrestler, this guy, he looks and he performs like a pro wrestler.
That's awesome. Next couple questions here for you. I got another one here from Mike Ducey, aka Mike the Sign Guy. He always gets to ask the weird, fun questions, so we get to rapid fire. Have you ever seen the movie The Lighthouse? And what did you think?
I'm sorry, I really haven't.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think it's probably a horror movie. Knowing him, he likes to ask these weird questions. I also haven't seen The Lighthouse, so I was like, I'll just throw that in there. Recently, he also asks, recently you worked for a show for Ringside Wrestling in Regina, which was his nephew's first show. During the intermission, you walked by his nephew and shot him a nasty look that legit terrified his nephew. Do you enjoy getting that reaction out of children at shows, or is that just part of the job?
No, I love it. I absolutely live for that. I remember it was a couple of years ago. So I didn't grow up in a family that was really super into wrestling.
Right.
My brother, for a few years, was really into wrestling, but really it was me. But then you get some of my family members talking. You get my dad talking or my uncle talking, and they'll talk about going to Atlantic Grand Prix shows at the Antigonish Arena back in the late 60s and into the 70s, right? And, watching Andre wrestle in this little arena and watching all these guys who would go on to be mega stars in professional wrestling. in these arenas, but what stands out to them is, it's not the cool matches that they saw, it's how they felt watching it, right? So when I go into it, I mean, you've seen my matches. They're a little more basic than some people's matches. I'm not necessarily going in there to get style points. I'm going in there to get a legitimate emotional reaction, so that, hey, with any luck, maybe 40 years later, those guys will be telling their kids and their family members and their nephews that I remember, back in 2020 when I went to that ringside wrestling show, and this is how that Sydney Steele guy made me feel, right? To me, that's really the essence of what pro wrestling is being able to generate that actual, real, genuine emotion out of people that they're going to remember.
It's crazy how much you can tie emotion to wrestling, because I can say, like, I remember feeling those things as well. Grew up a huge fan of The Undertaker. Like, every time he would come on TV and I'd hear that gong, I would just get these instant chills. And then one time I remember my dad took me to a live event in Calgary, and The Undertaker was there. And I remember for the first time I heard the gong in real life for the first time, like being in the crowd, and I started crying because I was so happy. Like, I was like, it was like this feeling you can never recreate again, and it's all thanks to wrestling as a child. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I genuinely believe that's the stuff people are going to remember. That's the you can do all the cool spots you want, and unless it's a jaw-dropping, how the hell did they survive that spot? There's probably going to be something cooler later on the card, or the next the next event, or a couple weeks later that they're going to see on TV, but people are going to remember how they felt sitting in the building that night.
100%. I can always say there's a million different types of wrestling styles out there, but the one that I always like the best is the one that's really good at storytelling. I love high-flying moves and moves that, are really cool and flashy and everything, but at the end of the day, I'll remember the spot, not necessarily the match. Yet, if you can tell an amazing story in the ring, and this is why I'm such a big fan of people like Cody Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes, their match they had that last year, I think there was like 20 wrestling moves total during the entire match, and it was still my match of the year because every move felt like a story. And And I think that's the best type of wrestling. And when I went down to Lethbridge for the Power Rumble, like you said, you're not like the guy who's jumping off the top rope constantly. You're not hitting every crazy move. But your match that you had with Jumpin' Josh was my match of the night because you guys told a really good story of the ring. It wasn't just like immediately going spot after spot. There was a lot of, like tension that built throughout the entire match. You could see the fatigue start building over time, things that you could do at the beginning of the match you couldn't do at the end of the match. I think that's like my epitome of perfect storytelling in wrestling.
Oh, thank you. And I look at personally the wrestling I like, and I mean there is pretty much wrestling on some screen at my house anytime we're here. Right? Anytime we're home, there's wrestling on whether it be the television or the computer or a phone or something. And I always find the wrestling I like the best is the wrestling that looks legitimately like a fight. The wrestling where you can't tell these two guys are helping each other do this. The wrestling that it doesn't look choreographed and rehearsed. And that's me personally. And I find there's less and less and less of that on cards these days. Even the matches that feel more like a brawl when you're watching them, sometimes you just sit back and it looks like they planned that. They planned for this person to be in this place at this time for this, whether it's a move or a spot or whatever. And I'm not watching wrestling. I'm not big on that type of wrestling. Two guys that I really, really like, actually down here in Lethbridge are Bryn Watts and Travis Copeland, and they, the last two guys that were in the Power Rumble, and I mean, you were there watching those two. They started throwing punches at each other.
Oh, it was amazing! Yeah,
they were throwing bombs that were connecting, and that's not just because it's the main event of the Power Rumble. That's how they wrestle. They go out there and if you have a match with either one of them, you're going to remember that you had a match with one of those two guys. And, neither one is out there doing a ton of flashy, crazy stuff, but they're doing fundamental stuff perfectly. And it all looks legitimate. It doesn't look like, okay, we're out here trying to, put on the best style points, acrobatics production that we can.
Oh, no, I think you're perfectly correct by saying like Travis Copeland and Bryn Watts, when they finished out the Power Rumble, it felt so legit. Like it felt like almost like an actual street brawl. It felt like there was a lot of emotion and intensity behind both of them. Big congratulations, of course, to Travis Copeland for picking up that win. But like, I'll say this about Cowboy Bryn Watts. He was going down and seeing him in the Power Rumble. That was my first time I actually got to watch him live for the very first time. And I have to say that he probably has like the greatest face in wrestling, because he's got this like very stern face, but at any moment's notice, he can convey any emotion immediately and perfectly.
When he's wrestling, he doesn't say anything.
No.
He says very little. But it's just those looks he gets on his face.
Yeah, he tells every story with his eyes and the way he like shapes his mouth when he's getting punched and stuff. It's perfect. Yeah. I love that. That's something I pulled back from that, and I was like, that guy's awesome.
I would agree completely. Those are two guys that unfortunately they don't get seen nearly enough. Really, neither one of them does a whole lot of wrestling outside of pure power wrestling. Mm-hmm. And, it really is too bad that they don't get seen by more people than they do, because, I mean, they're two guys that really, really are great at what they do. And, two guys, both of them that I know for a fact can walk into a ring without even having seen one another or even having seen their opponent beforehand and pull out just an unreal match.
I can believe it, absolutely.
And, it's like I said, like I've been saying, we do things a little differently down here. Even in the way we train, our guys are expected that, if I point at you and I point at you and I tell you get in the ring, you don't need 10 minutes to talk about it. You can go in and have a match, and it's going to be a good match. And I think that's a little bit of a lost art, and I think it's a really important thing for guys to be able to do.
I want to ask you a whole bunch more questions. We are cutting it a little bit short, but I want to rapid fire a couple of questions off for you as a promoter. In a training situation, have you ever just been like you go in the ring and they put on a match that not only was good, but it blew you away?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it happens on, I don't want to say a regular basis, but it's sort of the way that we train down here is, at the end of the night when everybody's tired, we'll sit there and say, all right, which two guys want to get in the ring? And they will, most of the time, they'll get in the ring and absolutely tear it down, Every now and then, you'll get guys that'll hop in there and, it's the end of the night and they're tired and they've never really worked together and things don't quite work out. And that happens in every situation. But, some of these guys are putting on matches that I wish we had cameras on because they're just that good.
Can you give us an example of a forgotten match that nobody will ever get to see that was just, you're just like, I think back to that match still?
I mean, it was probably a couple months ago, just before Kyle Sebastian unfortunately got injured in that steel cage match. He and Bryn Watts was helping him train for the match, and the two of them went in there and just absolutely tore it down in front of an audience of nobody and wrestled for, it had to have been 35 minutes. Like I said, in front of an audience of me and maybe two other people.
That's insane. I got to make it down for one of your training sessions one of these days. That'd be awesome. I'll just bring in I'll be like, everybody here is going to be incredibly jealous of me right now. I have another question I'd like to ask you that I've asked every interview that I've done so far. Throughout the plethora of different types of championships that we've had throughout the history of wrestling, be it a belt or a sword or a shield, there's been so many different types of championships. if there was ever one championship that you could hold, or that you could be like the current holder of, what would you love to call Sydney Steele's championship?
The big one, and I guess RCW's got a version of it, but the old Stampede Wrestling, the British Commonwealth mid-heavyweight title, all of the guys throughout wrestling, specifically, I guess, in this territory, that I thought were the best, or I thought were the coolest, were guys that held that title at one time or another. And so I'd say that would be if I could hold one, it would be that one.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. A lot of people always go out to the the biggest championships, or the biggest belts in the world, but you're just like, no, I've got the history of the local scene, and I want that one. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, cool. Sydney. But before I let you go, where can people find you? Plug all your stuff.
You know what? I am on absolutely everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and ProWrestlingTees.com, and you can find all of them at Steele Star, SteeleStarr.
Fantastic. All right, buddy. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. Once again, I hope PPW starts up here sooner than later when this whole COVID-19 situation calms down. But as soon as it does, I'm grabbing me and a bus full of people, and we're heading down there to Lethbridge for one of your shows. So you better expect us.
Looking forward to it.
All right. You have yourself a wonderful day, buddy, and I'll talk to you soon. A huge thank you once again to Sydney Steele for joining me here today to talk, his life in wrestling, his time as a promoter, and answer all of your questions as well. It was a great time. I really recommend going down to Lethbridge. Everybody, go check out a PPW show here as soon as they're back up and running. I seriously couldn't recommend it highly enough. It was a great chat. Also, remember to go check out Pure Power Wrestling on their YouTube channel. Everything is going to be listed in the link below, so you're not going to want to miss that. If you liked this episode, remember to hit that like button and subscribe on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. It also helps out the show immensely if you left us a 5-star rating and review, if that is what you want to do. Remember to go back over to wrestlesode.com/spotlight to check out this week's Wrestler of the Week, and it'll be updated probably weekly every Wednesday, I think, for the next little while. Anyways, go check it out. Hope you have yourself a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.